On today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to do my favorite modifications to the Hendrix Fuzz Face by Dunlop. You can buy the pedal, you can mod it, you can do anything. Before we start modifying the circuit, let's talk about its history, where it came from, and why that matters. Sometime in London, 1964, a Vox engineer by the name of Dick Denny creates a prototype fuzz circuit and puts it in a small tin case. He wants Vox to release something like the Maestro fuzz tone, so he takes this prototype to the owner of Vox, Mr. Jennings, and says, "Hey, let's put this on our line, people will buy it." Mr. Jennings does not like fuzz, he does not like distortion, and he says no. But about a year later, Vox releases the V816 distortion booster unit. And Dick says this is his circuit, the exact same circuit that he had prototyped in the tin enclosure. So apparently Dick won, and Mr. Jennings lets Vox release a fuzz circuit. Now this is where it gets interesting. Next door to Vox is Macari's. And Gary Hurst is the engineer there. He invents the tone bender, and then there's a tone bender 1.5 version. This is in '66. It's the exact same circuit as the Vox V816 distortion boost that Dick designed. To even further this story, Gary Hurst assisted Dick, and they worked together at Vox for quite some time. So, whose idea was it? Where did it come from? And does that really matter? Probably not, but the story is the prototype turned into the Vox 816. The Vox 816 was then used by Gary Hurst to do the tone bender 1.5, and then Ivor Arbiter across town takes that exact same topology of those circuits and puts it in a circular enclosure and calls it the Fuzz Face. This is 1966. That's when Hendrix arrives. And that's the fuzz choice of Hendrix. He comes to London, sees the new Fuzz Face, adopts that pedal, and that's why we're modding this. That's why there's a signature version. And that's why it's really important to know when you learn to do this mod, there's a lot of other circuits that use this topology and the mods will work. So you're not just learning how to mod a Fuzz Face, you're learning how to modify a legendary fuzz circuit. Let's get started. The version of the Fuzz Face that we're modifying, this Hendrix Signature Edition, already sounds fantastic and it's already modified. This circuit is basically using the specs and values that Roger Mayer would have changed in Hendrix's original Arbiter Fuzz Faces. We know that all of Hendrix's gear was modified by Roger, and Roger shared those values, and Dunlop is putting them in this edition. So this is a killer pedal. It sounds great. It has high quality parts inside, and it's $149. I mean, it's great as is, but you can buy it, you can do this mod, and have a lot of fun. So let's look at the circuit on a whiteboard and understand what we're about to do.
And now it's time for Circuit Zen.
The first thing to notice about this circuit or any other Fuzz Face style circuit is that it contains two transistors. They're labeled Q1 and Q2 on the schematic. And a transistor is an amplifier. So we have one amplifier amplifying the guitar signal and slamming it into another, and this is creating that beautiful distortion fuzz. Let's look at the circuit, walk through each part, and I'll show you the mods we're going to do. Our guitar is the input. So you strum a chord or a note, and it goes first into a 2.2 capacitor. So this can be changed. We're not going to mess with it because I like the 2.2, but if you wanted to play around and make it more like the Tone Bender 1.5 or more like the 816, you can adjust this up or down. You can go to 5 UF for more bass, or you make it smaller than a 2.2. You can go down and do a 0.1 or 0.01, and you can get into like treble booster sounds. But yeah, that's what that's for. It's fun. You can do that later. And it's easy to change on the circuit board. We first go into this Q1. Now, through the cap, into that transistor, and we go into the base. The emitter is to ground, and the collector, you have a network of resistors here. You have a 20K, and you have a VR1 trim pot. Now, this VR1 is so the factory workers, that are building this at Dunlop can take a screwdriver and adjust this trim pot exactly where they need it on a multimeter and leave it, not to be touched. But we want to mod it. We're going to pull the 20K out, we're going to pull VR1 out, and we're going to replace these with a 1 meg potentiometer that we're going to leave in the case, but you can easily turn with your hands and it adjusts this whole setting. And that's going to be awesome because you get to adjust the bias of the Q1 transistor, and it's really fun, trust me. Now, as we go into the base, we've also split off down here. As we're coming out of this collector, we're going into the base of the next transistor, and then out of that emitter. And you have this entire network here, which is causing the distortion setting. It's causing the gain of these transistors. It's doing a lot of things, but what we want to mess with is this 1K potentiometer. That's the fuzz pot. When you're looking at the fuzz face and you turn the fuzz control, it's this 1K control. I'm not a huge fan of this potentiometer. I think it's kind of pointless because just turn your fuzz all the way up and use your guitar volume to make the fuzz more clean. That's what I do. That's what most people have always done. So let's pull this out. Let's basically fix it at 1K. It's just always there. And then we're going to go up here, and Q2 has that same trimmer network, so you can set the bias of Q2. We're going to pull out VR2. We're going to leave the 3.1K, but we're going to pull out the trimmer, and we're going to put a 10 KB external pot on this trimmer for the bias of Q2. It's going to go where the old fuzz control was, and you're going to have a whole lot more fun. So fixed fuzz all the way, roll off your guitar for cleans, but your fuzz control is now an external bias control for Q2. If you want to mess with the 0.1, kind of a similar thing as the 2.2, you can filter out smaller caps, cut off more low end, larger caps, let more low end through. And then the last mod we're going to do, we're going to take out the 470K volume potentiometer. We're going to replace it with a 500K B. This is going to give you much more powerful output. Perceived volume is going to be better, and you won't have to turn up the volume control all the way. Let's dive in. But first, just stare at the schematic. It's really cool. Just stare at it. It's not weird. I'll do it with you. It's so nice. You're going to need some tools like a soldering iron, solder, needle nose pliers, wire strippers, screwdrivers, sockets or wrenches, solder braid, solder sucker. The parts you're going to need are a 500 KB potentiometer, a 10 KB potentiometer, and a 1 meg C potentiometer. You're also going to need some wire, a cup or a parts tray for holding the parts you remove, because if you lose them, that's going to really sting. Hot glue and a hot glue gun, or some 3M tape. Be sure that you're soldering properly. I recommend you watch some videos and practice because it's really important, or you could ruin the circuit board. So we put a link in the description below of a really good tutorial. Also, take your time. Don't get in a hurry. If you get in a hurry, you'll regret it. You might ruin the pedal. It won't be as fun. Just take your time. You're welcome. Here's the sound of the Hendrix Fuzz Face, just like it comes out of the box. It's awesome, but I'm going to demonstrate it just so you know what to compare to later on. Today, I'm going to be demonstrating the pedal with my Nystrom Telecaster model guitar and an early 90s Tweed Fender Blues Deluxe, totally set clean with a little bit of reverb. Now let's listen to the mods so you can hear some of the crazy sounds you're going to be able to get out of this pedal when you're finished. Step 1 to the mod is to remove all the hardware and prep things. We need to remove the back plate by removing the Phillips head screw in the center. You want to remove the knobs with a small flathead screwdriver. Simply turn those screws to the left and the knobs come right off. And then notice there is a plastic washer or two. I've modded a few of these and it just depends. So you're going to need one of these later, so put it in your parts tray as well. Now we want to remove the hardware that holds the potentiometer, these, into the enclosure. So we want to remove these brass nuts right here, and we're going to use a 1/2 inch socket. I'm using this guy, I love it. There's a link below. Just going to turn it left, loosen them up. Then you can finish this with your hand. You'll pull this off and you'll notice there's a washer. Now those potentiometers come off. On the inside you're going to notice a star washer like this, like a little lock washer. I'm going to just put that aside as well. Let's also remember to put our hardware into the dish, because if it can, it will fall in the floor or your dog will eat it. Label those pots for your memory. It'll be worth it. Just take a Sharpie, put an F on the fuzz pot and a V on the volume. Now unscrew the 2 Phillips head screws from the PCB so that we can get underneath it and remove things, add things, and do the work we need to do. You're going to notice there is a brown wire that's in the screw and then it pops out. Just remember to put that back. What it does is it actually is a ground component. So you're gonna put that in there and then put it back later and tighten it down. And that's very, very important for the circuit. It helps with noise. Step 2 is to change the 470K pot on the volume over to a 500K B. This allows the volume pot to be more powerful. You won't have to turn up the volume all the way like you do on a standard Fuzz Face. Now a few things. I prefer in a Fuzz Face to use a bigger 24mm pot. I think they're just bigger and cooler. But it's, it's hard times. I'm in my basement. Shops are closed. So in quarantine, I'm going to use a normal 16mm B500K. And it'll work, and we're gonna make it work with a little trick. Now it's really tempting to unsolder these wires that are on the 3 legs of this pot, because we know we're pulling this out, but let's not do that, because we want to remember where they go and we want to make this modification as simple as possible. So what we're gonna do is we're actually just gonna take this with the hardware removed and we're gonna insert it into the hole, the plot there for that, and we're going to center it. We're going to put our finger on, put some pressure, and then we flip it over and just kind of center it up. It's not the same style pot. It's a little too small, but actually with this little hack here, take that plastic washer, we saw a few of those on the old ones, let's just shove that down on there. So you need to press it down, turn it as though it is a nut, it'll eventually work its way in, and that's going to keep this area kind of filled. Now you got that on there, and then we put the metal washer, and then we put the nut from the actual pot we're using. Tighten it down with your fingers first, and then we want to take the number 10 socket or wrench, whatever you have, and you just want it to kind of point in. You don't want the lugs over here. You need them basically point these 3 lugs down to the foot switch. We'll do that on the other pot as well. Just picture a triangle here. So now that that's in, we're going to hold it in place so it can't slide, and we're going to tighten that down. Now we want to remove 1 wire at a time from this pot and place it on the corresponding lug of the other pot. So let's do this guy, the brown on lug 1. So pot labeling is 1, 2, 3. You go across, so 1, 2, and 3. We're gonna do lug 1 is brown, and we're gonna put it on that lug 1. So I'm just gonna hold it in this hand, pretty simply, take my soldering iron, heat this, just lay the soldering iron on here, and that wire is essentially going to fall out. And now I'm going to make sure these wires are pushed aside, make sure those lugs are straight. One's a little bent, And straighten it up. You might want to take your wire strippers and do a fresh little strip of the wire. Take that, put it through there, and I'll just bend it around. It just helps it stay in place like that. Heat the lug up, apply some solder. So there's the first wire, soldered on. Lug 2 is a blue wire here. That is actually the output of the fuzz circuit. So let's switch it out. Again, just heat it up and it pulls right out. Last wire on that old original volume pot is lug 3. 1, 2, 3. So this is lug 3. It's purple. There we go. Just take the old pot and do this. Put one of the stars down on it. Put your normal washer that was on there, and then just screw on your nut. What this is good for is just keep this. You never know. You might want to return it to stock, and that way you have all the hardware. This is very specific hardware. So take that, put it aside. You might need it one day. Now let's put this on here. All right, we have successfully soldered in a new 500 kb potentiometer. Step 3 is to remove the original fuzz pot and mount it internally. Like I said, it's kind of useless. Let's leave it all the way up, but we'll always have it there if we want to mess with it. Simply mount it inside with some hot glue or 2 layers of 3M tape. You can't use just 1 layer because it's too thin. The pot actually pokes out a bit on the back, so 2 layers will cover the whole back of the pot, making it a really good connection point with the case, and it won't fall out. The next step is step 4, where we need to replace this fuzz pot that we've made internal. It's going to be behind the back plate and just leave it fixed. We need to give this an external fuzz control, and so what we're going to do is we're actually going to modify this circuit to where we can put a control for the bias on the outside, and that's one of my favorite controls for a fuzz face. So first thing is let's take a B10K pot and remove the hardware. Pots have little tabs on them, and I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but sometimes you have to break that tab off like that. Because I don't have everything I need here at the house, I'm not at the shop, normally I would use pots like this that actually have lugs to put your wire through and solder, even smaller versions of that like I used a minute ago. The only B10K I have is actually a PCB mounted pot that's very different. So what I did is I just kind of crudely snipped it off with wire cutters, and I'm going to solder down into that. It's fine, it works. It's not the greatest thing, but it'll last. Let's put that down here. Remember, point it away. So you have the PCB here, so I want to make sure to kind of point it away like that. Let's center it on the outside just like the other pot. Remember those plastic washers. Put it down on there like that. So there's the new fuzz pot. It's actually a bias pot, but it feels like fuzz, and you'll see that when you play it. Now we need to wire up something to these 3 lugs. So let's do that. So on the back of this circuit board, we're going to find a labeling that says VR2. VR2 is this little guy. It is a small trim pot, meaning you can take a screwdriver and insert it and turn that screwdriver. Now, the problem is it's internal. They set it at the factory to a certain setting, which I'll explain later, and these break if you play with them enough. So we're actually going to remove this, and this is a surface mount part. Now, it's not too crazy, nothing too complicated, but basically you have 3 pads where this little tiny part is soldered to this board. There's a pad at the bottom right here, there's one up here, and one over here. So 1, 2, 3. We're going to apply heat right here, and with the tip of the soldering iron, just flip it up like this. Just apply heat right there, it'll melt the solder. And then you just want to flip it up. There you go. It raised up off the board. And now we just want to heat these back pieces, the back pads, and then it fell right off. Now we have these positions for VR2. We have this pad, and this pad. So we're going to solder wire on there. You need 2 pieces of wire. I have a couple here that are 4 inches long, and these are from the shop. I have a bunch here when I'm doing breadboarding, but they're just pre-stripped, and 4 inches is a great length. So we're going to use 2 of those. So you might want to take your wire strippers and just fix you some wire. Now that we've removed that part, let's solder these wires onto the pot that we put into place. We're going to solder to lug 2 and lug 3. So for me, I'm going to insert these wires right there. Alright, now we have those 2 wires soldered into place. We're going to solder the other ends to the circuit board. Holding a circuit board is really weird. I have these little legs that clip onto things, so I'm going to clip this here, but you can have a friend hold it. You can figure out some other method, whatever you need to do. One of those wires is going to solder to the top left pad of the 3. So there's this, this, and this. We're going to do that top left, and then the other wire to the bottom single. So nothing solders to the top right side. So just keep in mind the top left and the bottom single. It doesn't matter which wire goes where. So I'm just going to put those wires here, and I'm going to add a little solder to the end of each one just to help it out when you're soldering onto the surface mount. Now when you're soldering to the surface mount, you just want to do it quickly and you want it to stick, and it will be good enough. So let's do this first one here. And I'm going to take some pliers because it's just helpful for me. And I'm going to hold the end of that one wire with pliers like this. And I'm going to take my soldering iron, and the solder that's on the pad and that I just added to the wire will be enough to make this a really good hold. So I'm going to heat it up. Hold it really still. Done. Let's do the other one. So we're going to solder this to that top left. I'm going to heat the pad, heat the wire, hold it really still. Done. A really good move for these is to take, if you have it, that hot glue gun. Just because these parts are so small, just put a dab of hot glue on there and like smush it down. Just like that. And that helps. Just any friction you might have there. We have finished. We have an external fuzz bias. We're just going to call it the fuzz pot, but we all know it's bias. It's a secret. This external bias control in the place of the fuzz control is really useful. The stock voltage setting for the internal bias adjustment is 4.5 volts. This is what every fuzz face is usually set to. If you go above or below that, you have a lot of different sounds. You can get some more powerful, kind of gated sounds. You can have more saturated distortion sounds. There's just a whole lot more that happens when you have this Q2 bias adjustment on the outside for your fuzz control. Step 5 is to replace the 20K resistor and the VR1 variable trimmer on the collector of Q1 with a 1 meg C taper pot. This is going to be awesome. It's going to let you adjust the bias and voltage just like we did on Q2 but on Q1. And this is really fun because you get to play with how that first transistor is acting, and it's going to make Q2 react, and it's going to give you all kinds of new sounds that were not available. So the first thing we need to do is locate VR1. Now VR1 is this trimmer. So we removed, added wires, and glued, some of us glued that trimmer. So now we are removing this guy. So the same process, we're going to take our soldering iron And we're going to heat that front pad, and we're just going to lift it up. Then we're going to heat the other legs. Ta-da! There it is. It's itty bitty. So we've removed this trim pot, but we need the current of the circuit to still flow. So normally it flows in here into the trim pot and out. So we want to just jump across these top two. We're going to lay the leg or a piece of wire, anything conductive, and just solder it across here. So I'm going to use my little Doc Ock tool. I'm going to dab on a little bit of solder to those top pads. You actually could just bridge them with solder, but I just did. I want to be really sure. So I want to just take the leg of this resistor, lay it on there, and let the solder flow so that leg is going across the top two pads. Then I take my clippers and just clip it off. A lot of the resistor left. You can still use it in a circuit. You didn't waste anything. The next thing we want to do is remove this resistor. Now on the back side, you'll see a label that says R2. See this label R2. Now we want to remove the resistor, and the leg is here and here. So we're going to desolder. We're going to heat this up, and we're going to lay our solder braid on it or use a solder sucker. Watch one of the videos on the internet about how to do that if you don't know how. And we're going to pull that part out. So I'm going to take my Doc Ock hand. I'm going to use my solder sucker here. I'm going to heat that till I see smoke coming out and the solder is smooth, and then that just removes solder. I'm going to do it a few more times. Let it set, make sure it's shiny and you can see that it's melted. Suck it out again. Let's do it a third time. I still see solder. You should see all the way through the board when it's completely clean. You should be able to see light from the other side. That's pretty solid. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side of R2. So R2 kind of jumps across where that old trimmer was, and then it's actually two things are soldered here, but we're just going to remove the solder. That looks good. Let's remove Doc Ock and see if that resistor just pulls out. Oh, that was satisfying. Came right out. Bada. So that resistor is not needed anymore, but I would keep it maybe in a little baggie or something. We need a couple more pieces of wire, 4-inch stuff. We're going to take the wire and we're going to insert it into those pads where the resistor was. Just like this. We're going to need to take our fingers and hold that in place, flip it over, and you should see the legs coming out of those pads, and then you just want to solder it in. So this is really helpful when you have like one of these third hand little Doc Ock things. See, I do that. There's all kinds of methods. Get creative. A little piece of advice is when you go to solder these, make sure, obviously it's a good solder joint. On this one, you've inadvertently unsoldered some of this pad as well. Just make sure it all heats up real nice. The next step is to mount the PCB back onto the standoffs here. We had 2 Phillips screws. When you're mounting the circuit board, don't forget this ground ring. You just want to put it underneath here, come down with the circuit board, and screw it on. Just fasten them down. You got 2 wires coming out of the top, and now those wires need to be mounted to a new control. And I want to take a C1 meg pot. Now, this is a very large potentiometer value. This is a very strange mod. I'm unaware of anyone else doing it, but I love it. There are B and A tapers. The C works way better for this. Now I'm gonna once again use one of these rigged pots where I've clipped off the legs. It is what it is, but hopefully you have ordered something nice like this. All right, before we solder our 2 wires to the pot, let's go ahead and mount the pot here. Now, you can do the 3M tape, like this, or you can do the glue. Let's just put a dab right here. A dab will do ya. C1 meg, let that dry. And all we're gonna do is we're gonna solder these wires just like we did to the other potentiometer over here. We're gonna solder it onto lug 2 and 3. Remember, we just glued the pot down, so lug 1 is here. So this is 2 and 3. So you just need to solder to these. So if a pot is upside down, like this, it goes 1, 2, 3. If a pot is right side up, it goes 1, 2, 3. It's very important because that'll be how it turns, and you don't want this to turn backwards. So let's take one of our wires here. Doesn't matter which one. Let's put a little bit of solder on the tip of both actually. Tin it a little bit, it helps out, especially with these pots I'm using. And we're gonna hold this down and solder. All right, now that those are soldered, you can kind of tidy it up. Like I'm gonna do this, where I kind of tuck it and bend it under the circuit board, like such. When this pot is down, it's at 1 volt. It's kind of the stock setting. When you max this pot out, you end up around 8 volts on this first transistor, and it completely shuts off. But the way this 1 meg C pot works, if you barely back off, you actually go from 8 to around 3.5 volts, and that's where some interesting magic happens, some fun gated sounds. And then from where you hear it turn on, all the way down to the 1 volt, it's all fun and it's all good. After you've completed the modification and you have this pot where you want it, like I said, I leave this maxed out. Maybe some of you guys are strange and you want to move that. It's up to you. This pot, you know, put it where you want it. I kind of have a spot I like it in. Once that's done, let's put the back plate on. We take it, and with the jacks pointing up, Fuzz Face goes right under it. So you take your back plate, kind of hold the screw in, and you're wanting to basically have it go right down into that center hole, which can be a little tricky. Boom, I did it though. And ta-da! Step 7 is a must. You've modded a pedal, you got to pick out some cool knobs. In the description below, I'll show you where you can order some, but you might have some laying around, or you might just keep the stock ones. Either way, try some different knobs. It's really fun. Step 8 is to sign it with your name, put the date that you finished it, and be really, really proud of this. You modded a pedal, and not just any pedal, a deeply historically significant circuit. You kind of know how it works now. You can order some different versions of this. You can play around, you can experiment. You're now an accomplished pedal modifying expert. Maybe not an expert, but you're good at this. You did it. Now that we've modified the fuzz, I'm going to turn that VR1 all the way down. That's going to be around 1 volt in the bias. And then we're going to crank up VR2 all the way, that external fuzz control that we now have. So check it out. VR1 all the way up and right in that area where you back it off and it's just turning back on. It's a really great spot, around 3.5 volts on the bias. And I'm just going to play with the new external fuzz pot, the VR2. Now I want to show you how much louder and more powerful the new modified version is. I'm going to use my switchback device to switch between them both. I have a little small foot switch on the back of the amp there. You'll see my hand go down. When I hit that, the light will go between green and red. When you see the switchback light is green, that's the stock version of the fuzz with the black knobs. And then you'll see it go to red if I hit the switch again, and it'll be the modified version with the gray knobs. Now I'm going to put those volumes at noon and show you how drastic it is in comparison. The last demo example I want to give here is how they both react to me rolling off the volume of the guitar. This is super important to me, and it should be to you on any good fuzz face, is that when you roll the volume back, it cleans up the tone and gives you all kinds of options just at your fingertips. So that's really important. We'll do the same setup. You can see how they both respond to that guitar volume control. A couple other optional things you might want to do is to buy one of the Voodoo Lab battery clip adapters. This lets us not have to drill into the case anymore, but simply add on that adapter, snapping it onto the battery clip, and then just run it out of the back underneath the plate. We put that in the description below so you can order one. Another thing you might want to do is experiment with other NPN silicon transistors. So it's really important that when you're looking for these on eBay or wherever, just type in NPN silicon transistor. You can pop some different ones in. Just remember how you remove the originals. Take some photos with your smartphone. Make sure you cover the bases of how you will forget things. Trust me, you will. Try different transistors. They have different sounds, and that's a really fun, easy, and relatively inexpensive mod. And lastly, don't forget that this works on tons of pedals. Tons of Fuzz Face pedals. Tons and tons. Thousands of pedals you can now mod. Really, you're that good. This week's Record Time is brought to you by 2012's Deep Sea Diver History Speaks. Now, I showed another record of hers on a previous Record Time, but this is kind of her debut record. She's amazing. I'm a huge fan, and we actually have an episode filmed with her, and it's going to air soonish. But go check this out. I'm a huge fan of how she uses fuzz. I love the sound of her writing. I love the drum sounds on these records. I love it all. You need to check it out. And just check out all of her records. But this one's really cool because it's her in an early stage and it's a little more raw, and I love the distortion tones. Thanks so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some stuff. I'm going to give away 2 of these. I have the boxes. They're brand new. I just opened them to mod them. This is the first one where I set up one night and basically wrote out this mod and planned the episode. And then this is the second one that I modded. It is the one that you saw in this actual episode. So I'm going to give them away. There's a link in the description below. If you're watching this, you can win it directly from the show here. That's going to be for this one. And then this one that's used in the video, I'm going to give it away at the JHS Show Patreon page. So if you're a member of the Patreon, if you're a patron to the show, thanks very much. You can win this. If you're not, go check it out. It's really cool. It supports our traveling and archiving history, all the interviews I do, all the documentary work that we're working on, and we'll give this to you. It's awesome. I do a monthly long-form talk on a subject that I'm studying, so you get extra content. There's giveaways like this. There's discounts. There's a lot of fun stuff. There's also the jhsshow.com. You can buy posters and shirts. You can get this shirt which says Eclipsed by Fuzz. I mean, that's necessary. There's a Fuzz Face spaceship coming out of the sky, so that's cool. Go check that out. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon for notifications of future episodes, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe. I'm here in my basement. You're probably at home in your basement. But now we can modify fuzz pedals. Yeah, bye-bye.